The Extremist Publishing podcast is endorsed by Heart 200, Scotland's most exciting road trip. Find out more at heart200.scot.
Hello and welcome to the Extremist Publishing podcast. I'm Tom Christie. It's a great pleasure to be joined today by Mr. Ian McNeish, who's the author of From Dumyat to Mont Blanc, Being Alive with Mountains, which is his memoir of a life spent on the mountains and in the hills of Scotland and far beyond. As befits a book which is set in the great outdoors, we are in fact broadcasting from an undisclosed location in the Highlands where Ian has a bothy. Ian, thanks for joining us today.
It was a bit of a trek to get here, but yes, it's a pleasure to be in your company.
So Ian, what can you tell us about your book? What was the inspiration behind it?
I had written another book, and I thought long and hard in that book what it was I was trying to tell the reader and how I wanted the reader to engage with that book. It's the same principle with this book in the sense that I come up with a different conclusion this time. I wanted to talk about my life meandering in mountains, but I didn't want it to come across as a high-end mountaineering book. I wanted it to be accessible to anybody as a storytelling book. That's what it was meant to be, meant to look like that. It was meant to be a series of stories set in the mountains, some of the stuff quite exciting perhaps, and other stuff just of interest, what you come across when you're in the hills, because it isn't all about getting to the summit necessarily, albeit that's the drive of most of it, but it's just being in the mountains, and the more I did it, the more I absolutely just wanted to be there. They started to own me, and I wanted to try and write it in a way that people started to understand that and felt that this book, as I said, to repeat myself, was accessible to people who are not even mountaineers. If that makes any sense, that was my logic.
Now, one of the things that you cover early in the book is your initial motivation to get into mountaineering. Now, you grew up in the town of Bonnybridge, which has as its closest hill Cowden Hill, which is not by any means the tallest mountain in Britain. So how did you first come about mountaineering as a hobby?
Well, I think something came before that. I think we're all different. We're all made different, and the spirit of adventure, perhaps, is how I'll put it. I no matter where I was, and in Bonnybridge, obviously, we started. My friends and I were always the ones that were raking into places that perhaps we should never have been in. We're taking certain risks. We're swimming in the canal. We're lots of things we did. That it was how we were made up, and we wanted to push boundaries, and we wanted to, take certain risks within limitations. And it just was natural after that. I mean, in between, it took me a long time to really get into it. But I boxed for a while. I played rugby for years. And when I realised that my rugby career was coming to an end, not that it was much of a career, but never mind, I did enjoy it. I thought, what else am I going to do? And a friend just invited me to go up mountains one day, as simple as that. And I went up, and I just suddenly saw a new world, and I thought, I really want to do this. So it was more than just the fact that I suddenly was up a mountain, but I think you need to have that make-up in you that takes that on board, because I'm sure other people have kind of gone halfway up mountains in their life and thought, this isn't for me. Well, it was for me. So that explains it.
And of course, one of the major topics that you cover in your book has been the number of Munros that you've been up over the years. Would you like to say something about your favourite Munro experiences?
Yeah. Well, I suppose it's a bit ticking the box type of stuff, and or anorak train spotting. I did that as well, by the way. But it isn't really about that. It's just that they're there, and there's the challenge to go and try another one and see what it's like compared to one you were on a while ago. Some, like anybody who's wandering up mountains, meandering through them, through Munros, ticking the book, some days you'll arrive in a Munro and you won't be able to see all day, and it'll be blizzarding or it'll be lashing of rain, and you might think, God, that wasn't much of a day, but you did it anyway. And then other days it is glorious. So I suppose these things impact on how you view what would be your favourite one. Would I have a favourite? I don't really know. I mean, yeah, there's 2 or 3 fit in there. I mean, Anshellach was quite special because apart from the situation that sits out in the west of Scotland, they're looking right out over the Hebrides and over the rest of the western mountains. It's a big hill. It's quite a fearsome looking hill, and it's a test. It is a test. But the fact is, I went over it with my 10-year-old son, and it was just a wonderful day in July. Unforgettable, really. And I suppose that I had to put that in my top 10. But some of the sky, the Coolin Mountain, the Coolin Ridge, the mountains on the Coolin Ridge, they're different. They take more than meandering, some of these, and so they're memorable in their own way, and they're wonderful. Scournan and Amvasta particularly are 2 that I absolutely love, and I've been up them more than once, different ways, different routes. They just draw me. The view of them from when you're coming from Portree, looking up into them, they're just spectacular. I don't know, there's more, but it doesn't matter which ones I pick. I need to go back to Dumyat. Dumyat's a small, 1,300 feet, 1,400 foot hill in the Ochils, at the west end of the Ochils. And it's a wonderful little hill. It's got everything a mountain would have, except height. It's just, and I think it was called the Teaching Hill at one point, and I used to take school parties up it, and as you stood on the summit of Dumyat, you can see the whole of the western, the mountains beyond, further north. You can see the site of, I think, 6, maybe 7 Scottish battle sites, across to Falkirk, Sheriffmuir, etc., Stirling itself, Bannockburn, Stirling Bridge, and more. And geology features. You look across and you can see the various outcrops that were formed during volcanic eruptions, etc. And there's far more to it than that. But Dumyat is it has to feature as one of my favourite hills, and it's not because of its height, just because of its interest. And it's just an iconic little hill at the west end of the Ochils. Yeah. So I don't know which is my favourite really, but they're all favourite in their own way.
Well, in addition to your travels up the various peaks of Scotland, you also spent a while cycling around the Western Isles as well. That must have been quite an experience.
It was. The Western Isles were one of these. There were blue smudges on the horizon most of the time when we were climbing mountains in the west of Scotland and the northwest. A place that, many people in Scotland have never been to, and I certainly had never been to either. But I always had this notion, God, I would love to go there one day. And then towards the end of the mountain, the Munro kind of circuit, my friend and I thought, there's a chance, we've got a break in our kind of itinerary, as it were. Let's go and cycle the Outer Hebrides from Barra to the Butt of Lewis. And we just did it. It took us 4 days. I loved every minute of it. It was cycling, it was different, it was lots of sore on the feet, sore on other bits of you. I did it for charity, which is really neither here nor... I mean, I raised a few pounds for Macmillan nurses, but I loved that experience as well. The people I met, people are so friendly. but they are anyway, and if you allow them just, to access your world and speak to them and communicate, most people are just absolutely delighted. And on that route, I met so many nice people right up through the Uists, Harris, and then right up to the top end of Lewis. Yes, I loved it, and it was an experience, and I'm 74 now, and I still plan to do it again. So there you go. So that's how much I loved it. So will I be fit for it? Who knows? But I'll try it anyway. Yes, it features. It was, in terms of cycling, it's not the hardest cycle that anybody ever did, but it's really, really, really enjoyable. It's just the freedom of being out there, just on a bike, not think of anything, just letting your wheels spin you. It's good. Yes, love that.
And staying on the subject of outdoor explorations, your activities took you far beyond Scotland.
Yeah, they did. I'm not sure which order they came in, but when my son was 26 and I was 52, there you go, that was a while ago, 20 odd years ago, I was, he was half my age. Our birthday's in the same week, as it turns out, in April. He was living out in New Zealand at the time, and an opportunity arose for me to go and spend a month with him and his fiancée in these days. And out I went, and I absolutely loved it. We got an old van with a mattress in the back. It wasn't a caravan, it was just a van, like a transit van. And we just travelled. We travelled from North Island, Rotorua, right down, away down into South Island, and then across, and then all the way back up. And in the process of doing that, we got involved in quite a lot of adventures. But the one, I suppose, that I covered in a bit more detail was whitewater rafting on the Kaituna River and going over the Akiri Falls, which, well, as far as certainly then, and I've no way of disproving or proving this particular, but is it a fact? I was told that that particular river, they have on the highest commercially rafted waterfall in the world, which is about 30 odd feet. So we had to go over this rapid 30 odd feet straight down in plunging to a pool below, and 50% of the rafts going over go upside down. Ours didn't, and we continued on. Exciting stuff. And yes, I loved every minute of it, and I wrote about that in a bit more detail. New Zealand's a wonderful place. I loved every bit of New Zealand. And I learned, and then in these days was the first time I had ever drunk flat white coffee. How about that for a piece of... Everybody's drinking flat white now, but in these days it seemed to be a delicacy in New Zealand, and I don't know where else, but certainly not over here. But everybody drinks it now.
And you had an even more gruelling experience when you took part in the Ultimate Challenge, not once but twice.
Aye. Yeah, my friend said it'll be a doddle, Ian. With the stuff that you've done. I was in mountain rescuing these days, and I'd done a bit of climbing and some quite heavy duty things, and yes, that was a doddle, okay. What I hadn't realised was I have a particular impediment in my feet, and it causes me quite severe pain in the bones of my metatarsals. But on normal days in the hills, when you're all away for a day, or maybe even 2 or 3 days, it never seemed to kick in. But when you're going to travel carrying your tent, your food, your clothing, in a big rucksack, 40 odd pound or whatever the weight was, it was quite heavy, for 11, 12 days on the trot, it suddenly started to appear with a vengeance. But having said that, that particular trip, I finished up having hallucinations after getting a big injection of penicillin in Braemar, and that came about when my foot became poisoned about 18 miles or so from Braemar, and my friend had to leave me because he needed to climb 2 Munros to complete a part of the challenge. It's to do with the high level. I didn't get the high level that time because it splits into two. And they went away and left me, and I couldn't get my boot on. So the only way I could actually get a boot on to complete the journey into Braemar was to actually perform an operation with a penknife on myself and cut open my foot. And then, for the squeamish among you, don't listen to this, and then squeeze all the yellow pus out till the blood started to run. Then I patched it up with plasters and I could get my boot on. I could walk in great pain, a different type of pain, and I walked into, and eventually I walked to Braemar and eventually saw a doctor and was advised to go home. And I did go home, but via Montrose, because I walked to Montrose despite what the doctor said, which is a bit stupid, but I did it anyway. It's what I'm like. It was, and other things happened, and I write them in the book, and it was, and I met so many nice people. It is not a competitive walk. It's an event that's populated, in my opinion, the ones I met, just lovely people who are so happy to exchange experiences and give you help as to what route to take on the next day, etc., etc. No, it's a wonderful event. It was called Ultimate Challenge. It then changed eventually to the Great Outdoors Challenge, and it still exists today, albeit this year it didn't because of obvious reasons. Yeah, it's a wonderful event.
Now, it's interesting that you mention the people that you encountered on your travels, because it seems to me that a lot of the experiences you've had have really been typified by some of the incredible people that you've met along the way.
Yeah. The challenge, for instance, I met a lady who in these days was in her late 60s, maybe 68, 69. And that was in the 1980s. The lady's dead now, but she was on her own. And she planned it to such a degree that she walked with hardly anything in a little rucksack, just her day bag. And I wondered how she could do that. But she didn't have a tent with her because she walked in a planned route where she could arrive at somebody's house, where she'd get bed and breakfast for the night, or a hotel, or a bothy perhaps. But she didn't need to carry sleeping bags, and so it's always a small bag she had. And she just dawdled along on her own and walked across the country. And she did it several times, and I was in awe of her. I thought, my goodness. Another time I was in Sligahan up in Skye. My friend and I that night would put the tent up, and we were heading in to the bar of the Sligahan for lemonade, I think, if I can remember correctly, perhaps. And we met Sam Galbraith and his wife. He was an MP at the time. He'd climbed in the Alps, and he was actually quite a very good climber. But he was an MP. I think he was a minister, in fact. And we had a great night in his company, and then back at his tent. He was still suffering. He was still ill in these days, and eventually an illness that, he was not a well man, but just a gentleman, just a decent, honest to goodness person that you would love to meet anywhere. He didn't have any airs and graces. Whether he was an MP or not was irrelevant to him. We talked mountains, and we just talked nice, decent, and he was a really decent guy. Yeah, he was another one. And there's been many. I met a 74-year-old once, same age as I am now, but I wasn't then. In the middle of nowhere on his bike. And he said, and during the conversation with him, we were climbing some mountains, we were cycling through the area. He had a tent set up. And after we'd done what we were doing, he was still there, obviously, because he was staying overnight. So he made us a big pot of tea, and we sat and blathered. And he said, "What day is it?" So we said, "Whatever, it's Thursday," we'll say. "What date is it?" So we gave him the date. My goodness, that's a month to the day since I left my house in Preston. And we asked him, "Where have you been?" He says, "Well, I cycled across to the AGM of the Cycle Touring Club across in York from Preston, and then I just kept on my bike, and I've cycled all the way up through Newcastle, in through the borders, and we were actually quite far north at that point in the mountains. And I just keep cycling up and down tracks. I carry with me," and I never forgot this bit, and he showed us, he had 30 metres of the thinnest climbing rope wrapped up in his his bag, his pannier. And we asked him why he needed that. And he said, well, sometimes I get to a point where I can't get the bike over the cliff, so I've got to lower it and then find a way around to find my bike. That was impressive. He's 74 years old. I just love talking to that guy. And there's so many of them up there who they're just the salt of the world, really. Yeah, that's part of why I love mountains as well, meeting these people. It wasn't just about the mountains per se, and just being in them and with them was just in itself, and the wildlife we come across. Yeah, I did meet some really good people. Interesting.
Now, given the title of your book, it would be remiss of me not to ask you about your alpine mountaineering experiences. What did it feel like being there on the tallest mountain in the Alps?
Well, I cried, if you really need to know. It was quite emotional, and for a moment, I'm not very emotional anyway, but I did, yeah. I've always wanted to go up Mont Blanc. It was just one of these things. I mean, some of my guys were top-end climbers, and they thought that Mont Blanc was kind of for softies, really. And they did, some of them. I don't mean that nastily, but they had other really, really hard peaks that they climbed, whereas Mont Blanc kills more people in a year than any of them. But and they regarded it as just a bit of a trek. Well, trust me, it's more than just a bit of a trek. I need to tell you, I just always had this notion I wanted to do it, and I was in the Alps the year before doing a thing called the Haute Route. That was a 10-11 day high-level trek across the Alps, staying high, at the back end of, I forget when it was, I think it was early September. So the snows hadn't quite arrived, but it was still all ice and huge glaciers, dry glaciers in these days, so it had to be roped up in case you fell through crevasses, which one or two of us did, funnily enough, but we were roped up, we were dragged out again. And that was wonderful. And if anybody wants an introduction to alpine walking, oblique climbing, then I would suggest that they actually get a guide and do the Haute Route. There are different variations of it depending on how hard or how easy you want to make it, and the time of the year is important as well. But it was wonderful, and it was a great introduction, and that set me up for going back the following year and climbing Mont Blanc. As I said, it was hard, physically hard, and there was some serious, because we crossed we went the original route. I'm kind of hesitating here. You went the classic route, and normally people come in from a different route from the route that we took. We went up the original route, right up the middle, over the Bossong Glacier, the way that it was climbed originally 200 years before us, and there was a lot of danger in it. It's objective danger in mountains anyway, but the danger might not have been us falling off something. The danger was most likely to be avalanched out of it, or having huge seracs fall on top of us. And we did see both happen. I don't mean people were hurt, but we saw a big avalanche at one point, which petered out before it reached us, and then we saw huge lumps of ice cracking off and falling into crevasses and stuff, not, quite near us. It was exciting, it was exhilarating, and I just loved it. And back to my days in Borenbridge I talked about, it's inside you, it's in your psyche, hoping and wishing and making yourself or putting yourself in these positions, and I just loved every bit of it. Yeah, and Mont Blanc, yes, it was it the pinnacle? Oh, in one sense it was, but yeah, I suppose it was really, but yeah, there was lots of other pinnacles. There's so many experiences out there that mountains just give you, in my opinion.
And one question I've always wanted to ask you is, your book is illustrated with some incredible photographs that you've taken and are drawn from your personal collection. Given the heights that you were at when a lot of these photographs were taken, did you have any problems with the camera? Was there any kind of, seizing mechanisms or frozen film or any of those kind of things?
No, not really. No, it was fine. And I never find, I mean, the only problems I ever have with a camera is my ability to actually wield it very cleverly. Yeah, no, I didn't have any. I suppose you could argue the only problem you have, or I had, particularly in the Alps, when you're on, the whole scene is white, and sometimes there's a blazing sun on you, is actually the technicalities of getting the camera to record properly, because it's just a glare and it's difficult. But apart from that, no, it never broke. I dropped a couple. In the early days, I didn't have a very good camera anyway. It was just small things I had. It was latterly I got better cameras. No, I didn't have any problem with it. Apart from adding to the weight, perhaps that was a problem. No.
Well, Ian, it's been great to chat with you about your mountaineering experiences, and anyone who's interested in finding out about how you get from central Scotland up just about every Munro in Scotland and then over to the Alps by way of the Western Isles in New Zealand will want to read this book and find out for themselves some of the really amazing experiences that you had.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. If I could just finish off to say, I said at the beginning the book was meant to be accessible. I've written it as if I was just telling stories round about a campfire or round about a hearth. And I just hope that because that is the way I've approached the book, because it covers lots of things, place names, etc., places, things of interest about geology, I just hope that helps the non-climber to pick the book up and just read through following my stories rather than worrying about whether or not it's hanging off ropes and stuff, which most of it isn't. I kept most of that out, and I talk about mountain rescue at one point with 2-3 I think quite amusing stories, but I've got to finish off. In the book I did it and say just now, I wrote mountain rescue from, perhaps I don't mean frivolous, but from a point of view of trying to keep it light-hearted and show how about the teamwork involved. But it's a serious game, mountain rescue, and some of my friends got killed in it. And so I do mention that at the end, but I tried not to hammer on about that. Yeah, I just hope you do enjoy the book, if you have a mind to get it. Thank you very much. Cheers, Tom.
It's been great to speak to you today, Ian. From Dumyat to Mont Blanc is available to buy from all good independent retailers and online booksellers worldwide. Thanks for joining us today. I hope that you'll tune in again soon.
If you would like to find out more about advertising on the Extremis Publishing podcast, please visit their website at www.extremispublishing.com for details.